All right, today we're going to talk about a king who wasn't just a ruler, but a true scholar, an innovator who completely reshaped his nation. This is the story of Sejong the Great.
So this is the man himself, King Sejong. And, calling someone the greatest king in their entire history, that is a huge statement. So what does it really take to earn a title like that? I mean, we hear that word great thrown around all the time, right? But what does it actually mean when we're talking about a leader? Is it all about winning wars, making the country rich, or is it something deeper? We're about to dive into Sejong's legacy to figure that out.
So to really get a handle on Sejong, we've got to rewind. Because, and this is the crazy part, the man who would become Sejong the Great, well, he was never even supposed to be king. Yep, he was born Yi-to, and he wasn't the first son, or even the second, he was the third. And in a system where the oldest gets everything, being number 3 basically meant you were off the hook. You get the perks, but not the crown. But here's the thing about Yi-to. He wasn't your typical prince. The guy was a total bookworm. There's this great story that his dad, the king, got so worried about his health, he literally took away all his books. But the young prince found one that was missed and just read it to pieces. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know about him, right? So you can imagine the king's headache. On one hand, you have the actual heir, Crown Prince Yongyang, who was, to put it nicely, troubled. He skipped his studies, chased women, not exactly king material. And then you've got the third son, Argai Chungyang, who everyone saw as brilliant, wise, and super talented. The difference was night and day. Well, something had to give, and it did, starting in 1417. The crown prince's behavior just got to be too much for his father. By the middle of 1418, King Taejong did something pretty radical. He fired his heir, and he didn't pick the second son either. He skipped right over him and nominated the bookish third son to be the new crown prince. And then, just a few months later, the king abdicated. And just like that, at only 21 years old, the scholar prince became King Sejong.
Okay, so he's the king. Now what? Well, this is where the story gets really good. This is where he starts earning that title, the Great. Because Sejong's reign wasn't going to be about winning wars. It was about an explosion of knowledge and invention. Seriously, under his watch, Joseon just blossomed. We're talking huge leaps forward in pretty much everything you can think of. Astronomy, medicine, printing, farming, even weapons. Sejong's curiosity and drive really touched every part of the kingdom. So, how did one guy pull all this off? Well, here's the secret sauce. He knew he couldn't do it alone. One of the smartest things he did was bring back something called the Hall of Worthies. Think of it like a 15th century super-powered think tank. He gathered the absolute sharpest minds in the country and basically said, okay, let's solve some big problems. And boy, did they get results. Look at this. On the left, that's part of a super complex water clock they built. And on the right, that's the very hall where Sejong was actually crowned. It became a hub not just for royal power, but for cutting-edge science. Get this. In 1441, Sejong scientists invented the world's first standardized rain gauge. To put that in perspective, a similar invention wouldn't show up in Europe for another 200 years. This was way ahead of its time. Okay, here's a number for you, 365. What on earth could that be about? That, my friends, is the number of volumes in this absolute beast of a project, the Yubangyu Tree. It was a massive medical encyclopedia. We're talking one of the biggest research projects in all of East Asia at the time. The whole point was to gather all the medical knowledge they could find to make the entire nation healthier. Okay, so you have all this incredible new knowledge. That's great. But how do you get it out to the people? Well, you need better tech. And that's what these are. These are cub-mean types, a new kind of copper movable type from 1434. The key thing is they were twice as efficient as the old versions. That meant they could suddenly print and share all these new ideas on a massive scale.
But Sejong wasn't just about gadgets and science. His vision was bigger. He wanted to rebuild his society from the ground up, from how people farmed to how the government itself worked.
And you can see that practical side right here. For ages, they had been using Chinese farming guides. Sejong was like, wait a minute, our land is different. So he had his people create the Nongsa Chiksol. And what made it a game changer? It was based on what actual Korean farmers were doing. It was knowledge from the ground up, and it led to way, way more food. I love this quote from him. He basically says, "Yeah, I know everyone thinks math is just a technical skill, but guess what? You can't run a country without it." At a time when scholars kind of looked down on math, he saw it for what it was, an essential tool. He wasn't afraid to go against the grain if it was for the good of his people.
And this really sums up his style as a leader. Yeah, he followed Confucian principles, but what did that mean in practice? It meant he believed in talking things out. He actually encouraged debate, and get this, he was even open to being criticized, which is pretty wild for a king back then. He even set up a way for regular folks to have their complaints heard. He had all the power, but he wasn't a dictator.
So, after this whirlwind of progress, how do people look back on him today, centuries later? Well, after all those years of pouring everything he had into his work, his health started to decline. King Sejong passed away in 1450. He was only 52. But the nation he left behind, it was totally transformed, way more advanced than the one he inherited.
It's interesting, though, how his legacy is viewed now. In South Korea, he's a national hero, an icon. They even named a city after him. But if you look at some sources from North Korea, the view can be a bit more skeptical, sometimes painting him as just another feudal ruler. It's a really good reminder that history isn't always a single story.
But I think for most of the world, this is the image that sticks. Sejong the Great. Not a warrior king, but a scholar king. A leader whose greatness came from his incredible mind, his passion for innovation, and a real, genuine desire to make life better for his people. And that brings us right back to where we started. What makes a leader great? Sejong's story gives us some clues, right? Things like curiosity, being willing to listen to others, and just having this relentless drive to make things better. So here's a final thought for you. Which of those qualities from the 15th century do you think leaders today need the most?